Welcome to a deep dive, tailored just for you. Today we're digging into the crypto market, looking at a bunch of sources from June 12th, 2025.
Yeah, quite a mix you've got here.
Exactly, mostly from CoinMarketCap, some articles, some market musings. We've got, overall market stuff, specific Bitcoin signals, and then a look at altcoins too. And the mission really is to unpack all these different bits of info, the market dip, these potential signals, what's happening with specific projects.
And try to see the bigger picture, right?
Yeah, exactly. Make sense of it together for you. Figure out why it matters today.
Right. It's not just listing facts. It's about finding the patterns, the connections between what your sources are saying, understanding the significance.
Okay, so let's dive in. The most immediate thing in your sources seems to be, well, the market took a bit of a hit today.
It did, yeah. The sources point that out clearly. Total crypto market cap down about 1.68%.
Okay.
Which puts it around $3.39 trillion. And trading volume, daily volume, that also dipped, down 5.27% to about $133.8 billion.
So a noticeable pullback across the board then.
Definitely.
And what reason do the sources give? Why the slide?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. They actually link it pretty directly. They mention panic, and the slide in crypto seemed to happen alongside a slide in traditional indices.
Oh, really? Which ones?
The DJT, the S&P 500, and NASDAQ. The sources suggest a connection there.
So suggesting maybe traditional market woes spilled over into crypto today.
That seems to be the implication in these articles, yeah. It hints that crypto isn't, totally insulated from broader financial sentiment, at least not day to day.
Okay, so a dip today may be feeling some pressure from the wider financial world. Got it. But here's the twist, right? Because other parts of your sources talk about Bitcoin specifically, and they sound, well, pretty positive.
That's the contrast, exactly. You see this immediate dip, but then you look deeper. For instance, one article mentions analysis from Glassnode.
The on-chain analytics firm.
Right. And the source says Glassnode sees key signals for explosive surge for Bitcoin's price.
Explosive surge? That's strong language. The source doesn't detail the exact Glassnode metrics, does it?
No, not the specifics.
Yeah.
But typically, when Glassnode is mentioned like that, it's looking at fundamentals. Things like, how much BTC is moving off exchanges, are long-term holders accumulating that kind of deep data.
Stuff that historically might suggest building pressure for a move up, even if the daily price is down.
Precisely. And then there's another signal mentioned. A Bitwise CIO, in an interview just a couple of days ago, apparently said, corporate Bitcoin adoption is just beginning.
Okay, corporate adoption, that feels significant. Why now? What's the reasoning given?
The source explains that traditional ways companies manage their cash reserves, well, they're becoming less attractive. Think low interest rates, inflation concerns.
Right. Holding cash isn't what it used to be.
Exactly. So companies are starting to seriously look at alternatives for their treasury, and Bitcoin is increasingly part of that conversation.
So let me get this straight. Market's down today, possibly linked to TradFi. But at the same time, we've got on-chain data potentially signaling a surge and commentary saying big companies are only just starting to get into Bitcoin.
That's the complex picture your sources paint. Short-term shop influenced by external factors alongside potentially powerful long-term fundamental drivers building underneath.
Okay, it's definitely not simple. Let's pivot then. What about the altcoin space? Your sources seem to cover quite a bit there too.
They do, both broad trends and some really specific project news. One piece, for example, asks that perennial question. Is altcoin season 2025 around the corner?
Altcoin season. How are they measuring that possibility? Is there an indicator?
Yeah, they mentioned the altcoin season index. It's a common metric people watch.
Right, that tracks how many alts are outperforming Bitcoin, yeah.
Exactly, over a 90-day window. The idea being, if a lot of altcoins start doing better than Bitcoin, it might signal that capital is flowing more broadly into the alt market, a potential sign of that season.
So it's a way to gauge if alts are breaking away, not just following BTC.
Okay.
And besides that broad question, there are specifics. BlockDAG gets mentioned quite prominently.
Very prominently. The source highlights they've raised a huge amount, $298 million.
Wow, okay. That's serious funding.
It really is. Suggests a lot of investor confidence. The article also notes its current price, 0.008S, and points to a massive ROI, 2,678%, during something called their record-breaking buyer battles.
2,600%.
Yeah. So the source positions it as a top pick, likely because of that momentum and the big fundraise. Shows that even if the overall market is choppy, individual projects can really fly.
Definitely makes it stand out. And there were brief mentions of others too, right? XLM, AVX.
Yeah, the sources note XLM price outlook and AVX price action are getting attention, and one headline mentions Solana ETF hype and bubble maps cool off, but doesn't go into much detail on those points in the sections you pulled.
Got it. More just flags on the radar. But there was another specific update too. Hello Labs.
Right, Hello Labs. They apparently just unveiled some major token economy upgrades for their Hello token.
Token upgrades, usually aimed at boosting value or utility somehow. What did they do?
The sources mention a couple of things. First, a burn and earn model for the Hello Club.
Burn and earn. So taking tokens out of circulation, potentially making them scarcer.
That's the idea behind burning, yes,
Yeah.
reducing supply. And the earn part suggests new ways for users to get or use the token. They also upgraded the wider ecosystem with the deflationary structure.
Reinforcing that supply reduction idea.
Exactly. And adding a multi-chain bridge.
Which makes the token usable on different blockchains, right? More versatile.
Correct. Better accessibility, wider utility. The source frames these changes as being designed to strengthen the token's long-term value and usefulness. A focus on fundamentals.
Okay, so that's quite a mix in the alt space, the big altcoin season question tied to that index. Then standout projects like BlockDAG with huge numbers. And others like Hello Labs focusing on, tweaking their tokenomics.
It really shows the diversity of what's happening beyond Bitcoin.
So let's try and tie this all together then. We've got the daily market dip, maybe linked to traditional finance. We have these underlying, potentially bullish signals for Bitcoin. And then this varied activity in altcoins. What's the synthesis here? What does it all mean when you put it side by side?
Well, what's really striking is seeing these different narratives playing out simultaneously. You have the crypto market clearly reacting, at least in the short term, to moves in traditional markets, like the S&P slide your sources mentioned. That suggests some level of connection or shared sentiment.
The external influence.
Right. But then you have these internal crypto-specific factors. For Bitcoin, it's the potential strength shown by on-chain data from firms like Glassnode and this ongoing story of corporate adoption, which is a fundamental demand driver. These point towards, a potentially different long-term trajectory.
Independent of daily stock market moves.
Potentially, yes. And the altcoin picture adds yet another dimension. It's not just one homogeneous block. You've got specific projects hitting major milestones, raising huge funds like BlockDAG, or making strategic upgrades like Hello Labs. They're driven by their own tech, their own communities, their own tokenomics.
Plus the broader altcoin market sentiment tracked by things like that index.
Exactly. So putting it all together,
Yeah.
it suggests the market isn't moving as one single thing. You've got macro pressures, you've got fundamental adoption trends for the biggest asset, and you've got innovation and project-specific developments driving pockets of activity elsewhere. It's complex.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not just one story. Okay, so quick recap for you listening. We looked at today's market dip, seeing how your sources linked it to traditional index slides. Then we contrasted that with potentially bullish signals for Bitcoin Glassnode data, corporate interest picking up. And finally, we dove into the altcoin world, the altcoin season question, specific highlights like BlockDAG's funding and Hello Labs token upgrades.
And seeing all those pieces together from your sources gives a much more nuanced view than just reading one headline, right?
Definitely.
So maybe a final thought for you to chew on. Based on all this, you've got this contrast. Daily swings seemingly tied to traditional finance, but also these underlying signals, strong data, real adoption pointing towards significant growth, especially for Bitcoin, but also for specific alts. So the question becomes, how do you interpret that? Which force feels more significant for the future? Is the market primarily reacting to external economic jitters right now? Or are these fundamental crypto-native growth signals the more important long-term indicators of where things are actually heading? So something to think about.
A very important question indeed. Lots to consider there. Thank you for helping us unpack all of this today in this deep dive.